water collection point where people can get water for free. For now, everyone can take as much as they like. But fights have broken out in this line over those taking way more than their fair share to supplement the 50 litres that they're allowed from their taps at home. So in the next few days, it's going to be manned by police officers. There'll also be a 25-litre limit per person. And in the next month, it's going to be shut down altogether.
I think it's a lesson that we must learn, that there can be a shortage of water. You know what I mean? And we have to deal with it, and that's it.
Half of the residents of Cape Town haven't managed to stick to an 87-litre limit per person per day. Now that limit's dropped to 50 litres per person per day. Day zero seems inevitable. So people are stockpiling what they can while they can by collecting water at natural springs and buying bottled water. The supermarkets are sold out. When the taps do run dry, 4 million residents are going to have to queue at 200 collection points across the city to collect a daily ration of just 25 litres.
We went to go and try and get plastic water bottles. We've been to about 10 different places. They all sold out. So there's definitely a sense of panic.
It's a little bit scary, but I'm hoping that they're just trying to scare us and that the rains will come.
Day zero has been moved to mid-April because this week alone an extra 40 million litres was saved every day, but that's still 90 million litres above the daily target. The dam levels are at just over 26% because of the prolonged drought and a population explosion in the city. It was one of the most populous cities in the country to live and work. The taps will be turned off when the dams reach 13.5%. The city plans to boost water supply with desalination, water recycling and aquifer projects where spring water is pumped into a reservoir. But most of those are behind schedule and will only be operational in May. Only informal settlements that use just 4% of the city's water supply, essential services and the central business district will have access to running water. Behind the scenes, there's political infighting in city government, there are fights between local and national government, and the threat of legal action over who exactly is responsible for this crisis. While the residents of Cape Town, they deal with the reality of living in a city that could become the first in the world to run out of water.
Now, for more on this, Dr. Anthony Turton joins me from Bloemfontein in South Africa. He's an environmental advisor and professor at the Centre for Environmental Management, University of Free State. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Anthony. Now, what are you expecting to happen on day zero?
Well, it is actually unknown what's going to happen. There's a lot of awakening taking place, a kind of renaissance. And suddenly business people are realizing that this is not a joke. And I'm also increasingly involved now with emergency planning operations as fairly substantial multinational corporations start realizing that this is a serious matter and that their current planning is just not adequate.
Okay, so you're involved in these emergency planning operations. So what sort of adjustments are people going to have to make when it comes to that day?
Well, the best way that I can describe this, if you go take that famous movie called Back to the Future, when you get into your DeLorean motor car and you go back to the medieval times, because the medieval times there was no real substantial trade and industry. People were living a life that was harsh, brutish, and short, and they would go and draw water at the well in the center of the village. And that's really what's going to happen now again. So a large amount of time is going to be spent just on drawing water. Things like schools are going to not really function as well as they should. Hospitals, for the time being, looks like they are going to be okay, but still under pressure. When it comes to businesses, for example, companies that manufacture food or package food, the hygiene in that process, of course, is now a significant factor that hasn't been properly thought through. And then, you get things like banks that generally aren't thought of as places that use lots of water, but you've got staff there that has to flush the toilet. And then, of course, you've got the unintended consequence if a fire issue breaks out that you suddenly don't have water in the fire hydrants. And we actually had a building burned down in Johannesburg last year for that exact same reason. So it's not only Cape Town, it's also other parts of the country as well.
Absolutely. That's a horrific scenario to imagine, a fire breaking out. I hadn't thought of that. Now, just to put this all into context, how would you evaluate the impact on the agricultural sector, business and really the economy overall?
Well, the Western Cape economy is driven really by two things. It's driven by tourism. It's one of the major tourist destinations of the world. It's one of the most popular destinations after the Kruger National Park. So it brings in lots of tourist dollars and euros. And then after that, of course, it's agriculture, but high-value agriculture, typically wine, fruits, and stuff like that, that contributes just over 40% to the GDP of the country. So when you drill down to the agricultural sector, they've really been hit very hard. And you get sort of three kinds of subsets in the agricultural sector. You get the people that produce short-term crops, the wheats and cereals, etc. They are being very hard hit now because they hit day zero before the harvest came in. But then you get the wine industry, the grape industry, and the people that produce deciduous fruits. Now they've got orchards and vineyards to tend to, and if they get wiped out, then we're looking at 7 years to recover. It must just be remembered, just to help people to contextualize it, that Cape Town is one of the 6 regions in the world that receives winter rainfall. So for agriculture to survive, it has to store water from winter rainfall period through the summer. And at the moment, given that the dams are all pretty empty, we're entering the rainy season a couple of months from now with empty dams. So that means that this is likely to be a multi-year event.
Okay. And Dr. Anthony, will this crisis become a recurring problem, or does the government have the power to solve this now once and for all?
Well, I think it's a big wake-up call for everybody. It's a question whether government will survive it, to be honest with you, because I'm starting to get the impression that actually government is really not really in charge of this thing. They pretend they're in charge, they make noises as if they're in charge, but increasingly the population are rejecting, certainly the municipal government and the provincial government. Whether the national government is still in control is actually something that's an open question right now. They will say they are, but I've been speaking to some big corporations now that are openly talking about the fact that they don't believe that regulation can take place, so they're starting to resort to self-help. Okay. So we're at a very dangerous point. Very dangerous point indeed.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Anthony. Thanks for your analysis.